Before we dive into this crazy story about how our HOA tried to charge us for using electricity on our own property, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. You know that moment when you open your mailbox and find a letter that makes your blood boil. That's exactly what happened to me last summer when our HOA president, Barbara Mitchell, decided she had the right to charge us for using electricity in our own backyard. But let me tell you, she had no idea who she was dealing with. I'm Mark Thompson, and my wife Emily and I bought our dream home in Desert Palms Estates, a quiet Phoenix suburb, about 3 years ago. We're not the type of people who go looking for trouble. I'm just a software engineer who works from home, and Emily runs her interior design business. We thought we'd found the perfect place to build our life together, away from the chaos of the city. The house itself was everything we wanted, modern, spacious, and most importantly, it came with a gorgeous backyard that we'd been transforming into our own little oasis in the desert. Emily had this vision of creating an outdoor living space where we could work, relax, and entertain. We installed energy-efficient LED string lights, a small fountain, and even set up a covered workspace where I could code while enjoying the fresh air. Everything was powered by outlets that were part of our house's original construction. Nothing fancy or unusual about it. We'd gone through all the proper channels, checked the HOA guidelines, and made sure everything we installed was up to code. Our electric bill went up a bit, sure, but it was our power, our property, and our choice. Or so we thought. That letter I mentioned, it arrived on a scorching July morning. I was in the middle of a video call with my team when Emily burst into my home office, her face a mix of disbelief and anger. In her hands was an official-looking document with the Desert Palms Estates letterhead. "Mark, you need to see this," she said, placing the letter in front of me. "They're trying to charge us for using our own electricity." I quickly wrapped up my call and read the letter. According to Barbara Mitchell, our HOA president, any excessive use of electricity in outdoor spaces needed to be approved by the board, and homeowners would be required to pay an additional monthly fee to the HOA for such usage. The letter claimed this was to maintain property values and ensure fair distribution of community resources. The kicker? They were trying to charge us $150 per month for what they called aesthetic power consumption. They even had the nerve to backdate these charges for the past 6 months, totaling $900. But here's the thing about me. I might spend my days writing code, but I also have a pretty good understanding of property law, and something about this whole situation didn't add up. Emily, being the organized person she is, immediately pulled out all our home ownership documents, HOA bylaws, and utility agreements. We spent that entire evening going through everything with a fine-toothed comb. What we found would eventually lead to one of the most ridiculous HOA battles I've ever heard of. And trust me, what happens next is something you won't believe. If you want to find out how we fought back against this absurd power grab, pun intended, and what happened when Barbara realized she'd picked the wrong homeowners to mess with, make sure you stick around. This story has everything. Suspicious HOA meetings, secret recordings, an emergency board election, and even a surprise ally who helped us expose what was really going on. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring that notification bell. You definitely don't want to miss part 2 of this story, where things start getting really interesting. Drop a comment below if you've ever dealt with an HOA trying to overstep their boundaries. Trust me, what happened next will make your jaw drop. And just wait until you hear about the spreadsheet that changed everything. Let me take you back to when we first moved into Desert Palms Estates, because understanding how everything was before this electricity nightmare helps explain why Barbara's power grab was so ridiculous. When Emily and I first drove through the neighborhood 3 years ago, it felt different from all the other Phoenix suburbs we'd visited. The streets were lined with perfectly maintained desert landscaping. Each house had its own unique character, while still maintaining a cohesive look. And there was this sense of peace that just felt right. Our realtor, bless her heart, kept emphasizing how the HOA kept everything running smoothly, maintaining high property values and ensuring the community stayed beautiful. We'd looked at 27 houses before finding this one. The moment we pulled into the driveway of 4287 Saguaro Drive, Emily squeezed my hand and whispered, "This is it." The house wasn't the biggest or the most expensive in the neighborhood, but it had potential written all over it. A modern southwestern design with clean lines, large windows, and that backyard, that incredible backyard that would become the center of our life, and eventually, this whole controversy. The previous owners had barely touched the outdoor space. It was just a blank canvas of desert gravel with a few cacti scattered around. But Emily, with her designer's eye, saw what it could become. That first evening, after signing the paperwork, we sat on camping chairs in our empty backyard, sharing a bottle of wine and dreaming about the future. We could create different zones, Emily said, sketching in her notebook. A workspace near the house where you can code outdoors, a dining area for entertaining, and a cozy lounge space for stargazing. She was already in full design mode, and I loved seeing her so excited. Over the next 2 years, we transformed that empty space into something special. We started with the basics: proper irrigation for desert-friendly plants, energy-efficient outdoor lighting, and a shade structure that made the Arizona heat bearable. Everything we did was methodical and by the book. We submitted plans to the HOA Architectural Committee, got approvals, hired licensed contractors, and kept detailed records of every modification. Our neighbors, David and Jenny Chen, would often stop by to admire our progress. They were a young couple like us who had moved in 6 months after we did. Jenny was pregnant with their first child when we met them, and now little Sophie toddles around their front yard, waving at everyone who passes by. They became our closest friends in the neighborhood, often joining us for dinner in our backyard oasis. "You guys have created something really special here," David said one evening, as we sat under the LED string lights, enjoying Emily's homemade paella. "It's inspiring other people in the neighborhood too. Have you noticed how the Wilsons started fixing up their backyard?" He was right. Robert Wilson, our retired neighbor across the street, had initially been skeptical of our modern backyard design. But after seeing how we maintained everything and how we used the space year-round, he started asking questions about our setup. He was particularly interested in our energy-efficient lighting system and how we managed to keep our electricity costs reasonable despite using the outdoor space so much. That's what made the whole situation with Barbara so absurd. We weren't doing anything excessive or unusual. Our monthly electric bill averaged around 200 dinnats during the summer months, pretty standard for a Phoenix home our size. We'd even installed solar-powered lights for some areas to reduce our energy consumption. Everything was properly wired, inspected, and up to code. Our routine was simple but perfect. I'd start my workday early, often taking my laptop to the covered outdoor workspace to catch up on emails while enjoying the cool morning air. Emily would use the space to meet with clients, spreading out material samples and design plans on the outdoor table. In the evenings, we'd turn on the soft lighting, put on some music through our small outdoor speakers, and unwind under the stars. The HOA seemed perfectly fine with everything we'd done. We regularly attended the monthly HOA meetings, though admittedly they were usually pretty boring affairs. Barbara would go through the usual items, reminders about trash bin placement, updates on community landscaping, and the occasional dispute about paint colors or holiday decorations. We'd never had any issues with the board. In fact, they'd previously used photos of our backyard on the community website as an example of desert-friendly outdoor living. That's why the letter about our electrical usage felt like such a betrayal. We'd done everything right. We'd built something beautiful that added value to the neighborhood and inspired others to improve their properties too. We'd created a space that brought people together, hosting game nights with the Chens, helping Robert Wilson plan his backyard renovation, and even organizing a small community fundraiser for Jenny's pregnancy complications last year. Looking back, there were probably signs that Barbara was planning something. She'd started doing more frequent neighborhood walks, often stopping to take notes while staring at various houses. During the May HOA meeting, she'd made some vague comments about reviewing utility usage patterns and ensuring community resources were being used appropriately. But none of us could have guessed what she was really planning. Our backyard had become more than just an outdoor space. It was where we lived our life.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Emily and I had celebrated our anniversaries there, hosted both our families for holidays, and even helped David plan his surprise birthday party for Jenny under those same lights that Barbara now claimed were excessive. The thought of some HOA president trying to charge us extra for using our own electricity on our own property to power the life we'd built. It was infuriating. But what happened next would show everyone in Desert Palms Estates exactly what happens when you mess with the wrong homeowners. Because while Barbara was busy planning how to squeeze extra fees out of her neighbors, she didn't realize she was about to face off against someone who wouldn't just roll over and accept her demands. She had no idea that her little power play was about to turn into a full-blown community uprising. Remember that spreadsheet I mentioned? Well, it turned out to be just the beginning of a paper trail that would eventually expose something much bigger going on in our HOA. But before we get to that, you need to understand exactly who we were dealing with and how Barbara Mitchell came to believe she had the authority to charge people for using their own electricity. To understand how our peaceful life in Desert Palms Estates turned into a battle over electrical usage, you need to know about Barbara Mitchell. She wasn't always the HOA president. In fact, her rise to power is a story that perfectly explains how someone could become so obsessed with controlling every aspect of their neighbors' lives. Barbara moved into Desert Palms Estates 5 years ago, shortly after her divorce. She'd been an accountant for a large corporation in Chicago, and according to neighborhood gossip, the split had been messy. She bought one of the largest houses in the community, a sprawling single story with a 3-car garage that she kept meticulously clean. From day one, it was clear that Barbara viewed Desert Palms Estates not just as a place to live, but as her personal kingdom in waiting. The first time I met Barbara was at a community pool opening event. She'd only been living here for a few months, but she was already volunteering for every committee possible. Picture a woman in her late 50s, always dressed like she's heading to a business meeting, with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck that she'd used to peer at people over when she was about to point out some violation of the community guidelines. "You must be the Thompsons," she said, approaching Emily and me with a clipboard in hand. "I noticed you've installed some outdoor lighting fixtures. Did you submit a Form AE7 for exterior modifications?" Her tone wasn't exactly hostile, but there was this underlying suggestion that we'd already done something wrong. Thankfully, Emily is always organized. "Yes, we did," she replied, pulling out her phone. "We received approval last week. Would you like to see the email?" Barbara seemed almost disappointed that we had our paperwork in order. That was just the beginning. Over the next few months, Barbara attended every HOA meeting, joined every committee, and kept detailed notes on everything happening in the neighborhood. She had this way of making simple suggestions sound like mandates. Perhaps we should consider standardizing mailbox heights. Or, has anyone else noticed the varying shades of desert tan being used on exterior walls? The previous HOA president, a retired teacher named George Matthews, had run things with a light touch. He understood that while guidelines were important, a community was about people, not rules. But when George announced he was moving to be closer to his grandchildren, Barbara pounced on the opportunity. Her campaign for HOA president was unlike anything Desert Palms Estates had ever seen. She created detailed presentations about property values, distributed professionally printed flyers outlining her vision for community excellence, and even went door to door with spreadsheets showing how her leadership would benefit everyone. Most people didn't bother to vote in HOA elections, so Barbara won easily. That's when things started to change. Richard Cooper, the vice president, was the first to fall in line with Barbara's new regime. A retired banker who'd always been more interested in golf than HOA politics, he seemed happy to let Barbara take control. Linda Watson, the board secretary, was newer to the community and didn't want to make waves. Together, they formed what some neighbors started calling Barbara's Crew. Monthly HOA meetings turned into marathon sessions, where Barbara would present endless charts and graphs about everything from water usage patterns to the optimal height for desert shrubs. She created new forms for everything. Want to plant a cactus? Fill out form BM12. Thinking about repainting your door the exact same color? That's form BM15. But it wasn't until she hired Desert Valley Management Consulting that things really went off the rails. This consulting firm, which specialized in optimizing community resources, started conducting surveys of how residents used common areas and utilities. They installed new monitoring equipment around the neighborhood, claiming it was for security purposes. Barbara called it modernizing our community management approach. At first, most people just went along with it. The changes were annoying, but not outrageous enough to cause real protest. Robert Wilson, our retired engineer neighbor, even praised some of the initiatives. At least someone's paying attention to the details, he'd say, not realizing what was coming next. The real warning signs started appearing during the quarterly community meetings. Barbara began focusing obsessively on what she called resource utilization patterns. She'd project slides showing electricity usage rates across different sections of the neighborhood, comparing homes and suggesting that some residents were disproportionately impacting community infrastructure. I remember one particularly tense meeting where Jenny Chen asked what any of this had to do with the HOA's actual responsibilities. Barbara's response was telling. As president, it's my duty to ensure that all community resources are being used appropriately and fairly. Some residents' choices impact everyone's property values. Linda Watson, the secretary, dutifully recorded everything in the meeting minutes, but I noticed she seemed uncomfortable with the direction things were taking. During coffee at the community center, she mentioned to Emily that Barbara had been spending hours reviewing utility patterns and satellite images of the neighborhood. The consulting firm started installing additional monitoring equipment throughout the community. Small boxes appeared on utility poles, and Barbara insisted they were just for data collection purposes. When David Chen questioned the necessity of this surveillance during a meeting, Barbara dismissed his concerns with a wave of her hand. If you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. It was around this time that Barbara started her morning inspection walks. She'd patrol the neighborhood at dawn, tablet in hand, taking notes and photographs. We'd often see her standing on sidewalks, staring at people's homes with this intense focus, particularly at properties with outdoor lighting or water features. Emily started keeping a detailed log of these inspections, noting how Barbara seemed to linger longer at homes with more extensive outdoor setups. "She's building up to something," Emily said one morning, watching Barbara photograph our backyard from the sidewalk. "This isn't just about community standards anymore." We weren't the only ones noticing. The Chens installed a simple patio light and got an immediate advisory notice about exterior illumination guidelines. The Wilsons received a warning about their newly installed pool pumps' operating hours. Every modification, every improvement seemed to draw Barbara's attention and criticism. Then came the formation of what Barbara called the Resource Optimization Committee, a fancy name for what was essentially her personal task force. Richard Cooper and two other residents who always voted with Barbara were appointed as members. Their mission, according to the community newsletter, was to analyze and optimize resource utilization for the benefit of all residents. Looking back, we should have seen the electricity usage fees coming. All the signs were there, the monitoring equipment, the obsession with utility patterns, the constant references to community resources in her speeches. Barbara wasn't just building her power. She was creating a system where she could justify controlling how people used their own utilities. But what she didn't count on was that her perfect paper trail, her meticulous documentation, and her obsession with rules would eventually become the very things that would bring her down. Because when you're planning to charge people for using their own electricity, you'd better make sure every detail of your plan is legally sound. And Barbara, for all her attention to detail, had overlooked something crucial. The first real sign that Barbara was planning something bigger than just her usual micromanaging came during what should have been a routine HOA meeting in April. It was one of those perfect Arizona spring evenings just before the crushing heat of summer kicks in, and the community center was packed because Barbara had announced a special presentation about community resources. I almost skipped that meeting. I had a major software deployment scheduled for the next morning, but Emily insisted we go. "Something feels off," she said while we walked to the community center. "Barbara's been too quiet lately." My wife's intuition would turn out to be spot on. The meeting started normally enough. Linda Watson took attendance. Richard Cooper gave his usual treasurer's report about lawn maintenance costs, and Barbara went through her standard list of violations. Someone's trash can was visible for 3 hours and 15 minutes on collection day. Another resident had installed unapproved solar-powered garden lights, the usual petty stuff. Then came the special presentation. Barbara dimmed the lights and pulled up a PowerPoint that looked like it had been created by a management consulting firm. The title slide read, "Desert Palms Estates, a new approach to resource management." "As your HOA president," Barbara began, adjusting her glasses, "it's my duty to ensure our community remains at the forefront of modern property management practices. Over the past 3 months, Desert Valley Management Consulting has been conducting a comprehensive analysis of our neighborhood's resource utilization patterns." She clicked to the next slide, displaying a complex graph showing electricity usage patterns across different sections of the neighborhood. Our street, Saguaro Drive, was highlighted in red. "As you can see," she continued, "certain areas of our community are experiencing what we call excessive utility engagement. This creates an undue burden on our infrastructure and, more importantly, impacts our property values." That's when David Chen, sitting 2 rows ahead of us, raised his hand. "What exactly do you mean by excessive utility engagement? We all pay our own electric bills." Barbara's smile tightened. "While individual homeowners do pay their basic utility costs, the community bears the hidden infrastructure burden of excessive usage. Our consultants have identified several properties with what they term aesthetic power consumption that goes beyond normal residential needs." My stomach dropped as she clicked to the next slide. It showed thermal imaging, photos of several backyards, including ours. The LED string lights, the fountain, and my outdoor workspace were all highlighted in bright colors. These heat maps, Barbara explained, show areas of significant power usage for non-essential purposes. The consulting firm has recommended we implement a new fee structure to offset the community impact of these luxury power consumptions. The room erupted in confused murmuring. Emily was already furiously taking notes on her phone, while I noticed Robert Wilson, a retired engineer neighbor, shaking his head in disbelief. I raised my hand. Barbara, are you suggesting the HOA should charge people extra for using electricity they're already paying for? Mr. Thompson, she replied, her tone condescending. This isn't about basic electricity usage. This is about excessive aesthetic power consumption that affects our entire community's infrastructure. The consulting firm has provided clear evidence that certain properties, like yours, are creating disproportionate grid stress. That's when Jenny Chen stood up. But that doesn't make any sense. We all have individual meters and accounts with the power company. How can the HOA claim any authority over how we use electricity we're paying for? Barbara's response was ready, almost rehearsed. The HOA has a responsibility to maintain community standards and protect property values. Our consultants have identified this as a growing concern that needs to be addressed proactively. She then revealed the proposed fee structure: $150 monthly for high aesthetic power usage, $75 for moderate aesthetic power usage, and warning notices for properties approaching aesthetic power thresholds. The fees would be retroactively applied for the past 6 months. Emily's hand shot up. Can we see the consulting firm's full report and methodology, and the specific HOA bylaw that gives the board authority to impose these fees? Barbara's smile flickered for just a moment. The full report contains proprietary information, but summaries will be made available to homeowners who request them. As for the authority, it falls under the General Welfare Clause of our HOA agreement. I'm a software engineer, not a lawyer, but even I knew that sounded fishy. Looking around the room, I could see a mix of confusion, anger, and disbelief on people's faces. Linda Watson, the secretary, was typing frantically, trying to keep up with the heated discussion. Robert Wilson raised his hand next. As someone who worked in power distribution for 30 years, I can tell you this doesn't make technical sense. Private residential power usage doesn't create infrastructure burden beyond what the utility company already manages. Barbara dismissed his expertise with a wave. Our consultants have advanced monitoring equipment that shows otherwise. The data is quite clear. That's when I noticed something odd about one of her slides. In the corner of the thermal imaging photo of our backyard, there was a timestamp from 2 weeks ago at 2 a.m. Barbara, I called out, how exactly was this data collected? Did someone take photos of our backyard in the middle of the night? She quickly clicked to the next slide. The consulting firm used standard monitoring procedures. All measurements were taken from public areas. The meeting devolved into chaos. After that, several homeowners were shouting questions while Barbara tried to maintain control by threatening to end the meeting. Richard Cooper stood beside her, nodding supportively, while Linda Watson looked increasingly uncomfortable. Emily squeezed my hand and whispered, "We need to request every document they have. Something isn't right here." As the meeting wrapped up, Barbara announced that formal notices would be sent out within the week, along with the first round of fees. "This is for the good of the community," she insisted. "Property values are our primary concern." Walking home that night, David and Jenny Chen caught up with us. "This is insane," David said. "They can't actually do this, can they?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Something about those consultants and their monitoring equipment doesn't add up." Emily was already planning our next moves. "We need to get copies of everything: the HOA bylaws, the consulting contract, all the board meeting minutes from the past year. Barbara's methodical about documentation, and that might be her weakness. We had no idea then just how right Emily was, or that Barbara's obsession with documentation would ultimately lead to her downfall. But first, we had to figure out exactly what Desert Valley Management Consulting was really up to and why they were taking thermal images of our backyard in the middle of the night. After that heated HOA meeting, I knew we needed to understand exactly what we were dealing with. It wasn't just about fighting back against Barbara's ridiculous fees. We needed to prove she had no legal right to charge them in the first place. What I discovered would end up exposing not just the absurdity of her claims, but a whole system of manipulation that had been building right under our noses. The morning after the meeting, I took a day off work and headed to the county records office. Emily had already pulled our home's original deed and all HOA documentation, but I wanted to go deeper. I spent hours digging through property records, utility easements, and the original development plans for Desert Palms Estates. What I found was fascinating. Our neighborhood was built in 1998 by Southwest Development Corporation as one of the first smart planned communities in the area. The original development documents specifically emphasized homeowner autonomy in utility usage. In fact, they had deliberately chosen not to implement any community-wide utility management systems, instead giving each homeowner direct relationships with utility providers. The most interesting document was buried in a folder of original marketing materials. It was a sales brochure highlighting individual homeowner utility independence as a key selling point. The developers had specifically designed the infrastructure so that each home would have its own dedicated electrical service, separate from any HOA control. While I was at the records office, Emily was doing her own research. She'd reached out to James Martinez, a licensed electrician who'd done some work for us last year. James came by to look at those mysterious monitoring boxes Barbara's consulting firm had installed. "This is interesting," he said, examining one of the boxes mounted on a utility pole near our house. "These aren't standard utility monitoring equipment. They look more like surveillance devices with some basic power sensing capabilities." Emily recorded everything James said on her phone as he explained the technical details. "The thing is," he continued, "these devices couldn't possibly provide accurate data about individual home power usage. They're more like glorified motion sensors with some extra features." That's when Robert Wilson, our retired engineer neighbor, got involved. Remember how I mentioned he'd worked in power distribution? Well, it turns out he'd spent 30 years designing electrical grid systems for major cities. When he heard about Barbara's claims regarding infrastructure burden, he nearly choked on his morning coffee. "It's complete nonsense," he said, sitting at our kitchen table with a stack of Barbara's presentation printouts. "Residential power usage doesn't work the way they're claiming. Each home has its own meter and direct connection to the grid. There's no such thing as aesthetic power consumption creating community burden." Robert started breaking down the technical impossibilities in Barbara's claims. He explained how residential electrical systems are designed, how power is metered, and why the HOA couldn't possibly have any legitimate claim to charging for individual power usage. "Look at this graph they presented," he said, pointing to one of Barbara's slides. "These patterns they're showing, they don't match how residential power actually flows. It's like they just made up data to sound scientific." But the real breakthrough came when Jenny Chen, who works in corporate law, started looking into Desert Valley Management Consulting. She discovered that the company had only been registered 6 months ago, and their office address was a virtual mailbox at a UPS store. "This gets better," Jenny told us over dinner one evening. "Guess who owns the consulting firm? Barbara's son-in-law. They registered the company using a different last name, but I found the connection through state business records. The pieces were starting to come together. Barbara hadn't just overstepped her authority. She'd orchestrated an elaborate scheme to create a problem that didn't exist, then hired her own family's company to solve it. We needed more proof, though. Emily suggested we request copies of all HOA expenditures related to the consulting firm. As homeowners, we had the right to see these records. Barbara initially tried to stall, claiming the documents were under review, but Linda Watson, the HOA secretary, surprised us by quietly providing copies of everything. The financial records were enlightening. Desert Valley Management Consulting had been paid $50,000 for their comprehensive community resource study. The contract had been approved during a special board meeting with minimal attendance, and the minutes showed that Barbara had fast-tracked the approval process. But here's where it got really interesting. Robert Wilson noticed something about the monitoring equipment that broke the case wide open. He borrowed my laptop one afternoon and started cross-referencing serial numbers from photos Emily had taken of the devices. "These units," he said, pointing to his findings, "they're not professional-grade equipment. They're modified security cameras with some basic power-sensing add-ons. The whole setup couldn't possibly provide accurate power usage data. They're designed for surveillance, not utility monitoring." We also discovered something crucial about our HOA's legal structure. Desert Palms Estates was incorporated under Arizona's planned community statutes, which specifically limit HOA authority over utility services. The HOA could regulate external appearances and maintain common areas, but they had no legal right to monitor or charge for individual utility usage. Emily found an even bigger bombshell in the original HOA incorporation documents. There was a specific clause that prohibited the HOA from interfering with or charging fees related to individual homeowner utility services. This clause had been included specifically to protect homeowner rights. "They can't do this," Jenny confirmed after reviewing all our findings. "Not only do they lack the authority to charge these fees, but installing surveillance equipment without proper disclosure and trying to pass it off as utility monitoring could be illegal." The more we dug, the more obvious it became that Barbara's entire resource management initiative was built on false premises and questionable practices. But we needed to be strategic about how we used this information. Barbara had spent years consolidating her power in the HOA, and she had allies on the board who would back her up regardless of the facts. What really got under my skin wasn't just the attempt to charge us extra fees, it was the violation of privacy and trust. Those monitoring devices had been recording our backyards without our knowledge or consent, all under the guise of utility management. Robert Wilson's technical analysis became our secret weapon. He spent days documenting every flaw in Barbara's claims, creating detailed explanations that even non-technical people could understand. His reputation in the community and his professional expertise would make his findings hard to dismiss. We were building an ironclad case, but we needed to be careful about how we presented it. Barbara had a history of retaliating against homeowners who challenged her authority, and we knew she wouldn't back down easily. What we didn't know yet was that Barbara had already set in motion another phase of her plan, one that would backfire spectacularly and give us the perfect opportunity to expose everything we'd discovered. Sometimes the best way to fight absurdity is to let it play out just long enough for everyone to see it for what it is. Remember those first warning letters about our electrical usage? Well, they were just the beginning. Barbara Mitchell wasn't someone who backed down easily, and when she realized we were questioning her authority, she decided to make an example of us. What happened next would test not just our resolve, but the entire community's patience with a reign of control. 2 days after we started gathering evidence about Desert Valley Management Consulting, Barbara launched what I can only describe as a full-scale intimidation campaign. It started with daily compliance checks of our property. Every morning, like clockwork, she'd walk past our house with her tablet, taking photos and making notes. Sometimes she'd stand there for 10-15 minutes, just staring at our backyard. Emily documented everything. She set up a security camera, fully disclosed and perfectly legal, to record Barbara's increasingly frequent visits. The footage would later prove invaluable, but at the time, it just showed how obsessed she'd become with our property. Then came the notices. Not just about electricity usage anymore. Suddenly, every aspect of our property was under scrutiny. We received citations for everything imaginable. Our garden hose was improperly coiled, our window screens were creating excessive shade patterns, and my personal favorite, our wind chimes were generating non-approved acoustic emissions. No fun, she's trying to bury us in violations, Emily said one evening, sorting through the latest batch of notices. Look at this. She's claiming our outdoor furniture arrangement impedes optimal airflow patterns. What does that even mean? But Barbara wasn't just targeting us. Anyone who had questioned her electrical usage fees started receiving similar treatment. The Chens got citations for their patio lighting. Robert Wilson was written up for his pool pumps operating hours. Even Linda Watson, the HOA secretary who'd helped us access those records, found herself receiving notices about her landscape lighting. The community started to divide. Some neighbors, afraid of becoming Barbara's next target, began dismantling their outdoor lighting and unplugging water features. Others, led by our little group of resistors, started documenting everything and sharing information. Barbara's next move was to call an emergency HOA board meeting. The agenda included a vote on implementing what she called the Community Resource Protection Initiative. This would give her even more power to monitor and regulate how homeowners use their utilities. The night before the meeting, we hosted a secret gathering in our backyard. The same backyard that had sparked this whole controversy. David and Jenny Chen, Robert Wilson, Linda Watson, and several other concerned neighbors came together to plan our response. "Look at this," Robert said, spreading out technical diagrams on our patio table. He'd analyzed the specifications of those monitoring devices Barbara had installed. These things aren't just measuring power usage. They're recording video and audio. They're surveillance devices, plain and simple. Jenny Chen, still reviewing legal documents, looked up. "That's a huge privacy violation. They never disclosed these devices had recording capabilities. The HOA bylaws specifically require homeowner notification for any surveillance equipment." We were building our case, but Barbara was moving faster. The morning of the emergency meeting, every home in Desert Palms Estates received a glossy brochure from Desert Valley Management Consulting. It was full of technical-looking graphs and charts claiming to show how aesthetic power consumption was threatening property values. The brochure was professionally designed and convincing, if you didn't know what to look for, but Robert Wilson spotted the flaws immediately. "These power consumption patterns are completely fabricated," he said, marking up the graphs with a red pen. "Look at these peaks and valleys. They're mathematically impossible for residential power usage." The emergency meeting that evening was held in the community center. Barbara had arranged the room differently. The board members sat on a raised platform, looking down at the residents. It was a clear power play, meant to intimidate. "Based on our consulting firm's comprehensive analysis," Barbara began, standing at the podium, "we need to take immediate action to protect our community from excessive utility consumption. The Resource Protection Initiative will give us the tools we need to maintain property values and community standards." She clicked through slides, showing more graphs and charts, each one more absurd than the last. There were thermal images of homes, power usage projections, and something she called aesthetic impact assessments. That's when Linda Watson did something unexpected. As Barbara was explaining a particularly complex chart, Linda stood up from her secretary's seat and walked to the center of the room. "I can't do this anymore," she announced, her voice shaking but determined. "These documents we're presenting, they're not right. The consultation contract wasn't properly vetted. The monitoring equipment wasn't approved through proper channels. And she took a deep breath. The company doing all this work is owned by Barbara's son-in-law." The room erupted in chaos. Barbara tried to call for order, but her voice was drowned out by shocked residents demanding answers. Richard Cooper, her loyal vice president, sat frozen, staring at Linda in disbelief. "If I may," Robert Wilson stood up, holding his technical analysis. "I'd like to explain exactly what those monitoring devices are really doing, and why every claim about power usage in these presentations is technically impossible." Barbara's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "This is out of order. We're here to vote on the Resource Protection Initiative, not listen to unfounded accusations." But she'd lost control of the room. Neighbors were standing up, sharing their own stories of harassment and questionable violations. The Chens distributed copies of their research into Desert Valley Management Consulting's background. Emily started showing the security camera footage of Barbara's daily surveillance of our property. In a last-ditch effort to maintain control, Barbara tried to adjourn the meeting. "This is all being taken out of context," she insisted. "The consulting firm's data clearly shows." "The consulting firm is a fraud," someone shouted from the back of the room. "They're not even real power consultants." That's when Barbara made her fatal mistake. In her frustration, she let slip something she'd never meant to reveal. The monitoring equipment was necessary. How else were we supposed to know what people were doing in their backyards? The electrical usage was just an excuse to... She caught herself, but it was too late. The room fell silent as everyone processed what she'd just admitted. The electrical usage fees, the consulting firm, all of it. It had been a cover for implementing neighborhood-wide surveillance. But even as her scheme was unraveling, Barbara wasn't done fighting. She still had one more card to play, and her next move would force us to take legal action we'd hoped to avoid. What happened next would not only expose the full extent of her plan, but would lead to discoveries that would shock everyone in Desert Palms Estates. After Barbara's slip-up at the emergency meeting, you might think she would back down. Instead, she doubled down in a way none of us expected. The very next morning, every household that had spoken up at the meeting received a thick envelope in their mailboxes. Inside was what she called a complete property usage analysis, essentially a detailed log of everything we'd done in our backyards over the past 3 months. My hands were shaking as I read through our report. It included time stamps of when our outdoor lights were on, when we used our patio, and even notes about our guests. Thursday, 7:15 p.m. Thompson residence hosts gathering of 6 to 8 individuals. Excessive outdoor lighting and noise levels noted. They had been watching us, all of us. Emily was horrified. "They've been documenting every time we've used our own backyard. This is stalking." She immediately started scanning every page, creating a digital record of this shocking invasion of privacy. The Chens got it even worse. Their report included notes about their daughter Sophie's playtime schedule and when they used their grill. Resident child engages in loud recreational activities between 4-6 p.m. regularly. Barbara had been monitoring a toddler's playing schedule. Robert Wilson's technical expertise became invaluable once again. He started examining the monitoring equipment more closely now that we knew what to look for. "These devices," he explained, spreading out diagrams on our dining room table, "they're not just recording when power is being used. They have high-resolution cameras, directional microphones, and even thermal imaging capabilities." The truth about Desert Valley Management Consulting started unraveling faster than Barbara could spin new lies. Jenny Chen's legal background helped us understand just how many laws had been broken. This isn't just an HOA overreach, she explained during an emergency meeting at our house. This is illegal surveillance. They've been recording video and audio of private property without consent. But Barbara wasn't done. Her next move was both desperate and dangerous. She sent out an email to all residents announcing that the HOA would be implementing Phase 2 of the Resource Protection Initiative. This would include installing additional monitoring equipment, this time directly on individual homes. The email included a schedule for installation and a warning. Any homeowner who refused the new equipment would face daily fines of $500 for obstruction of community safety measures. She claimed these fines were authorized under the General Welfare Clause of the HOA agreement. That's when Linda Watson proved to be our unexpected hero. As HOA secretary, she had access to all the official documents, including the ones Barbara thought she had buried. Late one night, Linda showed up at our door looking nervous but determined. "You need to see these," she said, pulling out a folder of documents. "Barbara's been altering official records. I found the originals." She spread out two versions of the HOA bylaws, the original and Barbara's modified version. The differences were subtle but significant. Barbara had been quietly inserting clauses to give herself more power. The surveillance equipment itself provided the next breakthrough. James Martinez, our electrician friend, discovered something disturbing about the installation. "These devices," he pointed out, "they're tapping directly into the power lines without proper permits or safety measures. This isn't just illegal, it's dangerous." We took photos and videos of everything. Emily created a detailed timeline of events, matching the surveillance logs with Barbara's actions. The pattern was clear. She had been using the gathered information to target specific homeowners who might oppose her plans. The pressure kept building. Barbara started posting compliance updates on the community bulletin board, listing homes that were under resource usage review. It was a clear attempt to shame people into compliance. Our address was always at the top of the list, marked in red. Robert Wilson spent days analyzing the technical specifications of the surveillance equipment. "Look at this," he said one evening, pointing to a component inside one of the devices. "This model of camera is typically used for high-security facilities. It's complete overkill for residential areas and incredibly expensive." That led to another discovery. Jenny Chen found discrepancies in the HOA's financial records. The payments to Desert Valley Management Consulting didn't match the quoted prices for the equipment. Thousands of dollars were unaccounted for. Barbara's son-in-law's involvement became clearer too. The consulting firm had been charging the HOA premium prices for equipment that was being purchased at wholesale rates. The markup was astronomical, and all the profits were flowing through a maze of shell companies. The surveillance wasn't just about control, it was about money. Barbara and her family were profiting from every camera, every sensor, and every fake analysis they produced. They had turned our community's privacy into their personal cash cow. As the evidence mounted, more neighbors started coming forward with their stories. One elderly resident revealed that Barbara had threatened to put her home under 24-hour monitoring because her medical equipment used too much power. Another family had been warned about their Christmas lights months in advance. The turning point came when David Chen discovered something in the monitoring device specifications that even Robert had missed. These units weren't just recording, they were broadcasting. All the data was being sent to a remote server outside the HOA's control. "This means," David explained, his IT background coming in handy, "they've been storing recordings of our private activities on some external system we know nothing about. Who has access to this data? Where is it being stored? What are they doing with it?" Emily organized an emergency neighborhood meeting, not through the HOA, but as concerned residents. We gathered in our backyard, the very space that had started this whole controversy. As people arrived, you could feel the tension and anger building. We presented everything we'd found: the illegal surveillance, the financial fraud, the altered documents, and the privacy violations. Robert Wilson explained the technical aspects in terms everyone could understand. Jenny Chen outlined the legal implications. Linda Watson confirmed the document alterations, but it was the personal stories that really drove it home. One by one, neighbors stood up to share how Barbara's surveillance had affected their lives. Parents worried about their children being monitored. Elderly residents felt trapped in their homes. Everyone had a story of intimidation or harassment. Just as the meeting was wrapping up, someone noticed a new device being installed on the utility pole across the street. Barbara was moving ahead with her plans, regardless of the opposition. But this time, she had gone too far. The next morning, we took action. It wasn't just about fighting unfair electrical usage fees anymore. This had become a fight for our basic privacy rights. What happened next would not only expose the full extent of Barbara's surveillance state, but would have implications far beyond our little community in Desert Palms Estates. The day everything came to a head started like any other Arizona morning, bright and already heating up. I was working in my home office when Emily burst through the door, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. She'd just gotten off the phone with David Chen, who'd made a discovery that would blow this whole situation wide open. Desert Valley Management Consulting hadn't just been monitoring our power usage and recording our backyards. They'd been selling the data. David, being in IT, had managed to trace the data transmissions from the surveillance equipment. The information was being packaged and sold to marketing companies, security firms, and who knows who else. Our private lives had become a commodity. But that wasn't even the worst part. While we were reeling from this discovery, Barbara made her boldest move yet. That morning, every household in Desert Palms Estates received an official-looking document titled Mandatory Community Safety and Resource Management Agreement. It required all residents to consent to expanded surveillance and monitoring, including indoor power usage tracking devices. The document claimed that failure to sign would result in immediate daily fines of $1,000 and possible legal action by the HOA. Barbara had given everyone 48 hours to comply. She'd finally shown her full hand. This was a complete power grab, using our electrical usage as a smokescreen for total surveillance. I was reviewing the document when our doorbell rang. It was Linda Watson, looking pale and shaken. "They're installing the new equipment right now," she said. "Barbara didn't even wait for the deadline. She's got teams going house to house." We rushed outside to find a van marked with the Desert Valley Management Consulting logo parked in our driveway. Two men in uniform were unloading equipment, while Barbara supervised from the sidewalk, tablet in hand and a triumphant smile on her face. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," she called out, her voice dripping with false courtesy. "We're implementing the new safety measures as discussed in this morning's notice. Please don't interfere with the installation team." Emily started recording on her phone as I stepped forward. "This is private property, Barbara. You have no right to install anything without our consent." "Actually," she replied, pulling out a document, "under the new Resource Management Agreement, we have full authority to implement these measures. If you obstruct the installation, you'll be fined $1,000 per day, starting immediately." That's when Robert Wilson came running over, waving his phone. "Stop everything!" he shouted. "I've just gotten off the phone with the power company. These installations are illegal. They're violating multiple safety codes and utility regulations." Barbara's smile flickered, but didn't fade. "The HOA has determined these measures are necessary for community safety. Mr. Wilson, your interference will be noted and fined accordingly. More neighbors were coming out of their houses now, drawn by the commotion. The Chens arrived with their lawyer on speakerphone. Other residents started filming the scene. Barbara's installation team looked increasingly uncertain about what they were supposed to be doing. "Barbara," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "we know about the data selling. We know Desert Valley Management Consulting is owned by your son-in-law. We know you've been secretly recording our private lives and selling the information." Her face went pale, then red. "Those are baseless accusations. We're protecting property values and community safety." That's when Jenny Chen stepped forward with a stack of papers. "Actually, we have proof. Documentation of data transfers, corporate filings showing the company ownership, and evidence of illegal surveillance. Would you like to see it?" Barbara's composure finally cracked. "You have no right to investigate my personal business dealings. This is about community safety and resource management." "No," Emily spoke up, her voice steady and clear. "This is about power and money. You've been using our HOA dues to fund a private surveillance network, then selling our personal data for profit. It ends today." Barbara turned to her installation team. "Continue with the installation. Anyone who interferes will face immediate fines and legal action." That's when David Chen made the move that changed everything. He'd quietly approached one of the surveillance boxes during the confrontation and connected his laptop to it. "Everyone," he called out, "you need to see this." He turned his laptop screen toward the crowd. On it was a live feed from the surveillance cameras, views into multiple backyards, timestamps of residents' comings and goings, and most damning of all, a dashboard showing data being uploaded to external servers. "This isn't about power. Usage," David explained. "These devices are sophisticated surveillance systems. They're recording everything we do and sending it to outside companies. I've traced the data flows. It's being sold to multiple third parties." The installation team members looked at each other, then at the equipment they were holding. One of them spoke up. "Ma'am, we weren't told about any of this. We were just supposed to be installing power monitoring equipment." Barbara's face had gone from red to almost purple. "You're all in violation of the HOA agreement. The fines will start immediately. I'll have you all evicted." That's when Linda Watson dealt the final blow. "Actually, Barbara, you can't do any of that because, as of this morning, you're no longer the HOA president." The crowd went silent as Linda pulled out another document. "As board secretary, I called an emergency board meeting last night. With evidence of your illegal activities and conflicts of interest, the board voted to remove you from your position, effective immediately." Barbara lunged for the document, but Linda stepped back. "It's already been filed with the state HOA registry. It's over, Barbara." What happened next would go down in Desert Palms Estate's history. Barbara, finally losing all pretense of control, revealed exactly how far she'd gone to maintain her power, and inadvertently confessed to everything in front of dozens of witnesses with recording phones. But even as her scheme crumbled around her, Barbara had one last desperate move to make. What she did next would not only seal her fate, but would lead to consequences that would ripple far beyond our little community. After her public meltdown and removal as HOA president, you might think Barbara would finally back down. Instead, she did what people drunk on power often do when cornered. She lashed out with everything she had. Within 48 hours of her removal, every household that had opposed her received a certified letter from Stevenson and Blair, one of Phoenix's most expensive law firms. The letter was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. It accused us of everything, from defamation to conspiracy to interfere with business operations. Barbara was suing not just me and Emily, but 20 other homeowners as well. She was demanding $2.5 million in damages, claiming we had destroyed her reputation and her consulting business. I'll never forget sitting at our kitchen table that evening with Emily, David, and Jenny Chen, Robert Wilson and Linda Watson, all of us with identical letters in front of us. The amount was clearly designed to terrify us. Who has millions lying around for a legal battle? She's trying to scare us into backing down, Jenny said, her legal background kicking in. This is a classic slap suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. She's hoping we'll be too afraid of legal costs to fight back. But Barbara had made a crucial mistake. By casting such a wide net with her lawsuit, she'd given us common cause. Within hours of receiving the letters, our phones were buzzing with messages from neighbors organizing a joint defense. Robert Wilson offered his guest room as a makeshift war room, and by midnight, we had a plan. Emily, ever the organizer, had already created a shared drive with all our evidence, videos of the confrontation, technical documentation of the surveillance, equipment, financial records showing the money trail between the HOA and Desert Valley Management Consulting, and Linda's records of Barbara's document alterations. The next morning, I called in a favor from an old college friend who'd become a partner at Martinez and Associates, a law firm specializing in property rights and privacy cases. Sarah Martinez took one look at our evidence and smiled. They picked the wrong neighborhood to surveil, she said. This isn't just a defense case. You have grounds for a major countersuit. Barbara's high-priced lawyers had sent their intimidating letters on Friday, thinking we'd spend the weekend panicking. Instead, by Monday morning, they were served with our countersuit. We weren't just defending ourselves, we were going on the offensive. Our lawsuit laid out everything: the illegal surveillance, the fraud through Desert Valley Management Consulting, the data selling scheme, the document alterations, the abuse of HOA authority, and the attempt to charge for electricity usage she had no right to monitor. We included claims for invasion of privacy, fraud, harassment, and civil rights violations. But the real bombshell came from an unexpected source. Remember those monitoring devices that were sending data to external servers? David Chen hadn't just traced where the data was going, he documented every transmission. Working through the weekend, he'd created a comprehensive report showing how Barbara's company had been selling our private information to data brokers. This isn't just an HOA dispute anymore, Sarah Martinez explained during our first group meeting. This is a major privacy rights case. They were collecting and selling private data without consent, using an HOA as cover. There are federal laws against this. Barbara's lawyers tried to get our countersuit dismissed, claiming we had agreed to monitoring through our HOA membership. That's when Linda Watson's meticulous record-keeping proved invaluable. She had documented every unauthorized change Barbara had made to the HOA bylaws, including backdated additions, trying to justify the surveillance. The first court hearing was set for a preliminary injunction to remove all the monitoring equipment. Barbara showed up with 3 lawyers from Stevenson and Blair, all looking polished and confident. We had Sarah Martinez and her team armed with boxes of evidence and technical documentation. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Eleanor Martinez, no relation to our lawyer, listened patiently as Barbara's lawyers tried to justify the surveillance as necessary for community safety and resource management. Then she looked at the evidence we'd gathered. "Let me make sure I understand this," Judge Martinez said, peering over her glasses. "You installed surveillance equipment without proper disclosure, used it to monitor private properties without consent, sold the collected data to third parties, and then tried to charge homeowners for their electricity usage based on this illegal monitoring." Barbara's lead lawyer attempted to interrupt, but the judge wasn't finished. "And when the homeowners discovered this scheme, you tried to intimidate them with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit." The preliminary hearing turned into a 4-hour session as our evidence was presented. Robert Wilson testified about the technical, capabilities of the monitoring devices. David Chen explained how the data was being collected and sold. Linda Watson presented her documentation of the altered HOA records. By the end of the hearing, Judge Martinez not only granted our injunction, but also ordered an immediate forensic audit of all Desert Valley Management Consulting's records and servers. She appointed a special master to oversee the removal of all surveillance equipment and the preservation of evidence. But the real shock came when the judge referred the matter to the State Attorney General's office for potential criminal investigation. The evidence suggests this goes beyond civil violations, she said. The unauthorized collection and sale of private data, the fraudulent business practices, and the abuse of HOA authority warrant further investigation. Barbara's confident demeanor finally cracked. As we left the courthouse, she tried one last time to intimidate us. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." She was right about one thing. It wasn't over. The preliminary hearing was just the beginning. As the forensic auditors dug deeper into Desert Valley Management Consulting's records, they uncovered a scheme that went far beyond our community. Barbara and her son-in-law had been implementing similar surveillance systems in other HOAs across Arizona. The evidence was overwhelming, but Barbara refused to settle. She seemed determined to fight to the bitter end, even as her own lawyers started looking increasingly uncomfortable with each new revelation. What she didn't realize was that her stubborn refusal to back down would ultimately lead to her biggest mistake yet. The discovery process was about to uncover something none of us expected: a connection between Desert Valley Management Consulting and a much larger network of companies involved in illegal data collection. Barbara hadn't just been surveilling our community. She'd been part of something much bigger and much more sinister. The discovery process in our lawsuit revealed things far worse than we'd initially imagined. What started as a battle over electrical usage fees had uncovered a massive data collection operation, and Barbara's Desert Valley Management Consulting was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Our legal team, led by Sarah Martinez, had requested all communications between Barbara's company and their external partners. What came back was staggering. Over 50,000 emails, contracts, and technical documents. It took a team of paralegals 3 weeks just to organize the material. David Chen took the lead on analyzing the technical data. Working late into the night, he discovered that the surveillance equipment installed in our neighborhood was sending data to multiple recipients. Beyond the marketing companies we already knew about, there were transfers to shell companies, data brokers, and even a facial recognition firm. "Look at this," David said during one of our strategy sessions, pointing to his laptop screen. They weren't just recording when we used our backyards. They were building profiles, movement patterns, visitor logs, daily routines. They could track every time someone entered or left their property. Robert Wilson focused on the equipment specifications. His analysis revealed that the devices were far more sophisticated than necessary for simple power monitoring. "These units have capabilities we haven't even discovered yet," he explained. "They can intercept Wi-Fi signals, capture cell phone data, even monitor conversations through advanced audio processing." But it was Jenny Chen who made the most disturbing discovery. While reviewing contracts between Desert Valley Management Consulting and their partners, she found references to something called Project Watchtower. It was buried in the appendices of a technical service agreement. "This wasn't just about our neighborhood," Jenny explained, spreading documents across my dining room table. "Barbara was running a pilot program. If successful, they planned to expand to HOAs across the entire Southwest. Desert Palms Estates was their testing ground." Linda Watson's meticulous record-keeping proved invaluable once again. She had saved every email, every memo, every scrap of paper from her time as HOA secretary. Among her files was a presentation Barbara had given to potential investors, not for Desert Valley Management Consulting, but for a larger initiative called Smart Community Solutions. The presentation outlined a vision for total community awareness through comprehensive surveillance networks, all hidden under the guise of utility management. HOAs were the perfect cover. They already had the authority to regulate external home features and could mandate compliance through fines and liens. Our case took a dramatic turn when Sarah Martinez deposed Barbara's son-in-law, Michael Crawford, the nominal head of Desert Valley Management Consulting. Under oath and faced with mountains of evidence, he began to crack. "We didn't really care about power usage," Crawford admitted. "That was just how we got our foot in the door. The real value was in the data. Do you know how much companies will pay for detailed information about people's daily lives?" Crawford's testimony revealed that Barbara had approached him with the idea after attending a property management conference in Las Vegas. She'd met representatives from a company called Global Tech Solutions who were looking for communities to pilot their surveillance technology. They wanted to test their systems in a controlled environment, Crawford explained. HOAs were perfect. Private governance, mandatory compliance, limited oversight. Barbara saw the potential right away. The financial records told an even more damning story. Desert Valley Management Consulting had received over $750,000 in consulting fees from Global Tech Solutions. The money was carefully laundered through a series of shell companies, but our forensic accountants traced every penny. Emily had been documenting everything since the beginning, and her detailed records became crucial evidence. She had photos, videos, timestamps of Barbara's inspections, copies of every notice, every email, every interaction. What seemed like paranoid documentation at the time now proved to be vital evidence. "Your wife's records are incredible," Sarah Martinez told me during a case review. "She documented things we wouldn't even have known to look for. It shows a pattern of harassment and intimidation that goes back months before the electrical usage fees were ever mentioned." The surveillance equipment removal process, overseen by the court-appointed special master, revealed even more surprises. Some devices were found hidden in landscaping features, others disguised as ordinary utility boxes. The total number of monitoring devices in our community was more than triple what Barbara had officially disclosed. James Martinez, our electrician friend, worked with the removal team. "These installations weren't just illegal, they were dangerous," he reported. "They tapped directly into power lines without proper safety measures. One good storm and these things could have started a fire." Support for our case grew as more homeowners came forward with their stories. The Wilsons discovered their backyard conversations had been recorded during family barbecues. The Chens found footage of their daughter's birthday party in data files. Each revelation brought new waves of anger and disbelief. But the biggest breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A junior IT administrator at Global Tech Solutions, troubled by what he discovered, became a whistleblower. He provided documentation showing that Desert Palms Estates wasn't the only community being surveilled. Similar systems had been installed in HOAs across Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. "This is bigger than Barbara Mitchell," Sarah Martinez announced during an emergency meeting at her office. "We're looking at a coordinated effort to create a private surveillance network using HOAs as cover." The electrical usage fees were just a smokescreen for something much more invasive. The evidence was overwhelming, but Barbara remained defiant. Even as her own lawyers advised her to settle, she insisted on fighting. Her refusal to acknowledge reality would prove to be her final undoing. As we prepared for trial, Barbara made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. What she did next would not only seal her fate but would expose the full scope of Project Watchtower and its implications for privacy rights across the country. The final showdown with Barbara came 3 days before our trial was set to begin. Our legal team had spent weeks preparing, the evidence was overwhelming, and public interest in the case had grown as news of Project Watchtower spread to other communities. That's when Barbara made her last, desperate play, one that would spectacularly backfire. We were in the final preparation meeting with Sarah Martinez when David Chen burst into the conference room, his laptop in hand. "You need to see this now," he said, his voice urgent. "They're trying to delete everything." David had set up alerts to monitor Desert Valley Management Consulting servers after the court ordered them preserved. His screen showed dozens of file deletion commands being executed simultaneously. Barbara and her team were attempting to wipe all their data in direct violation of the court order. Sarah Martinez immediately called Judge Martinez, still no relation, who issued an emergency order. Within hours, federal marshals were seizing servers and computers from Desert Valley Management Consulting's offices. But that wasn't the end of it. As the marshals were confiscating equipment, they discovered something unexpected, a live connection to Global Tech Solutions' main servers. The deletion attempt hadn't just been about destroying local records, they were trying to erase evidence of the entire Project Watchtower initiative. This triggered a cascade of events that no one, especially Barbara, had anticipated. The attempted data purge caught the attention of federal investigators who had been monitoring Global Tech Solutions for similar activities in other states. Suddenly, our HOA dispute had become part of a much larger federal investigation. Next morning, as we gathered at the courthouse for an emergency hearing, the scene was chaos. News vans lined the street, reporters clustered around the entrance, and a team of federal agents stood conferring with our legal team. Barbara arrived, with her lawyers, looking shaken for the first time since this all began. Judge Martinez was furious about the deletion attempt. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, her voice sharp with anger, "would you care to explain why you attempted to destroy evidence under a preservation order?" Barbara's lead attorney tried to intervene, but she pushed him aside and approached the podium. What happened next was both shocking and somehow perfectly fitting. Barbara finally showed her true colors. "Everything I did was for the good of the community," she declared, her voice rising. "These ungrateful residents have no idea what it takes to maintain property values. The surveillance was necessary. The data collection was justified. Project Watchtower was going to revolutionize community management." The courtroom sat in stunned silence as Barbara continued her rant, inadvertently confessing to everything. The illegal surveillance, the data selling, the kickbacks from Global Tech Solutions, all of it. Her own lawyers looked horrified, but they couldn't stop her. "You think this was about electricity?" She laughed, an unsettling sound. "That was just the beginning. We were going to implement total monitoring in communities across the country. Think of the control, the order we could maintain. Every violation documented, every resident tracked, every activity monitored for compliance." Judge Martinez had heard enough. She ordered the bailiffs to remove Barbara from the courtroom, but the damage was done. Her public meltdown, captured by court reporters and witnessed by federal agents, had confirmed everything we'd been arguing. The judge immediately ruled in our favor on all counts. Barbara and Desert Valley Management Consulting were ordered to pay $5 million in damages to the affected homeowners. All surveillance equipment had to be removed from Desert Palms estates and any other communities where it had been installed. The court also issued a permanent injunction preventing Barbara from serving on any HOA board or working in property management. But the consequences went beyond our lawsuit. Barbara's confession in open court provided federal investigators with the evidence they needed. Within hours, Global Tech Solutions offices were being raided across 3 states. Project Watchtower was exposed as a massive illegal surveillance operation targeting HOA communities nationwide. The aftermath was swift and far-reaching. Barbara's son-in-law turned state's evidence, providing details about Global Tech Solutions' entire operation. The company's executives were indicted on multiple federal charges. The investigation expanded to include other HOAs where similar surveillance systems had been installed. Linda Watson, who had risked her position to help expose the truth, was elected as the new HOA president. Her first act was to implement a transparency initiative, making all HOA documents and decisions publicly accessible to residents. Desert Valley Management Consulting was dissolved, its assets frozen and eventually used to pay restitution to the affected homeowners. Barbara's legal troubles weren't over. She faced multiple criminal charges for fraud, privacy violations, and attempting to destroy evidence. The most satisfying moment came when we received the final settlement checks. Instead of keeping all the money, our community decided to create a homeowners' rights foundation, using the funds to help other neighborhoods fight similar battles against HOA overreach. Emily and I used our portion to finally finish our backyard project, this time with proper permits and no hidden cameras watching our every move. The Chen family installed the playground they'd always wanted for Sophie. Robert Wilson upgraded his pool equipment without fear of surveillance. But the victory wasn't just about money or revenge. We had exposed a serious threat to privacy rights and helped prevent it from spreading to other communities. The case led to new state laws requiring strict oversight of HOA surveillance activities and protecting homeowners' privacy rights. Barbara's dream of creating a surveillance state in suburban America had backfired spectacularly. Instead of controlling her community, she had inadvertently sparked a movement for HOA reform and privacy protection that spread across the country. The last time I saw Barbara was at the final hearing, where she was permanently banned from HOA activities. She still couldn't seem to understand what she'd done wrong. "I was just trying to maintain standards," she muttered as she left the courthouse. "You've ruined everything." But she hadn't maintained standards. She had violated them in the most fundamental way. In her quest for control and profit, she had forgotten that a community is built on trust, respect, and privacy, not surveillance and fear. The electrical usage fees that started this whole battle were never collected. In fact, the County Consumer Protection Office used our case as an example in their guide for homeowners about HOA rights and limitations. They even invited me to speak at a seminar about recognizing and fighting HOA overreach. Looking back, the whole experience taught us something important about standing up to injustice, no matter how small it might seem at first. What started as a dispute over electrical usage had exposed a nationwide surveillance scheme and brought a community together in ways we never expected. It's been 2 years since Barbara's surveillance empire came crashing down, and Desert Palms Estates has become a very different place. The massive legal victory didn't just change our community. It transformed how HOAs across the country approach homeowner rights and privacy. Let me tell you about what happened after the dust settled and the unexpected ways this whole experience changed our lives. The first big change came in how our community governs itself. Under Linda Watson's leadership as the new HOA president, we completely rewrote our bylaws. Every resident got a say in the new rules, and we made transparency our top priority. Monthly meetings are now streamed online, and all decisions are documented and accessible to everyone. It's amazing how much smoother things run when people feel heard and respected. Remember those monitoring boxes that started this whole mess? We turned their removal into a community event. One sunny Saturday, everyone gathered to watch as certified electricians took down the last pieces of Barbara's surveillance network. Robert Wilson, our retired engineer neighbor, gave an impromptu lecture about privacy rights and technology, which somehow turned into a monthly tech security workshop for residents. The Chen family, who had been considering moving after their experience with Barbara, decided to stay. They've become central figures in our community, with David leading a residents' technology committee that ensures any new community improvements respect privacy rights. Their daughter Sophie, now a bit older, has her dream playground where Barbara's surveillance equipment once stood. Emily's detailed documentation of everything that happened became the foundation for a handbook on fighting HOA overreach. She worked with legal experts to create a guide that's now used by homeowners across the country. The experience even inspired her to start a consulting business, helping other communities establish fair and transparent HOA practices. The settlement money we received did more than just compensate us for Barbara's actions. The Homeowners' Rights Foundation we established has already helped 3 other communities fight back against illegal surveillance attempts. It turns out Desert Palms Estates wasn't the only place where HOAs were trying to implement similar monitoring systems. But the most significant change has been in how neighbors interact with each other. The battle against Barbara's surveillance scheme brought people together in unexpected ways. The weekly community dinners we started during the legal battle have become a tradition. Every Friday, families gather in different backyards, sharing food and stories under stars that no longer hide secret cameras. Robert Wilson, who was initially skeptical of our modern backyard setup, has become one of our closest friends. He's transformed his own backyard into a solar-powered entertainment space, complete with energy-efficient lighting that would have given Barbara fits. He often jokes that fighting illegal surveillance was his retirement project. Linda Watson's Transparency Initiative has become a model for other HOAs. She regularly speaks at community management conferences about the importance of balancing community standards with individual rights. The phrase, "Don't pull a Barbara," has become shorthand in HOA circles for overstepping bounds. The legal precedent our case set has had ripple effects across the country. 3 states have passed new laws specifically addressing HOA surveillance and privacy rights, with several more considering similar legislation. They're informally known as Barbara's laws, not the legacy she was hoping for, I'm sure. As for Barbara herself, last we heard, she'd moved to a small town in Montana where there are no HOAs. The federal investigation into Project Watchtower led to major changes in how property management companies handle resident data. Global Tech Solutions was dissolved, its executives faced criminal charges, and the company's assets were used to establish a consumer protection fund. The monitoring equipment that was supposed to track our power usage, it's now part of a traveling exhibit about privacy rights in the digital age. Our story is featured as a case study in how ordinary people can stand up to surveillance and win. Emily's photographs and documentation are part of the display. One of the most rewarding outcomes has been helping other communities recognize and resist similar schemes. We've received messages from homeowners across the country who discovered suspicious utility monitoring programs in their neighborhoods. Our experience has become a roadmap for fighting back. The foundation we established continues to grow. What started as a way to help other HOA communities has evolved into a broader movement for privacy rights and community empowerment. We provide legal resources, technical expertise, and support to people facing similar battles. Looking back, it's almost hard to believe it all started with a bogus charge for electrical usage. The experience taught us that sometimes the smallest acts of resistance can lead to the biggest changes. Standing up to Barbara wasn't just about protecting our right to use our backyard. It was about defending the basic principle that our homes should be our sanctuaries, not surveillance zones. These days, when I work in my outdoor office space, or when we host dinner parties under our string lights, I think about how close we came to losing something precious. Not just our privacy, but our sense of community. Barbara's surveillance scheme was designed to divide us, but it ended up bringing us closer together. The lights in our backyard still shine bright every evening, but now they represent something more than just ambient lighting. They're a symbol of victory over surveillance, of a community coming together to protect its rights, and of the power of standing up to injustice, no matter how daunting it might seem. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this tale of HOA justice hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There are plenty more stories of standing up to unreasonable authority coming your way. Remember, whether it's an HOA trying to charge you for using your own electricity or any other abuse of power, you have the right to fight back. Our story might be over, but yours might just be beginning. Stay tuned, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.